Smith corks one into right down the line. It may go. Go crazy, folks. Go crazy.
Breeze hits it in the air to center. We will see you tomorrow night.
This is the Viva Alberto's podcast on SB Nation. Welcome into another episode of the Viva Alberto's podcast. Tonight we have the whole crew with us. We have Gabe Simons, Adam Akbani, and Heather Simon with us. And tonight we also have a very special guest. We have host of the pre- and post-game show on 1120 KMOX, as well as host of the Countdown to Opening Day show. Welcome to the Viva Alberto's podcast, Matt Pauley.
Look down, got no regrets. I was made for this.
Matt, how you doing tonight?
I'm good. Jake, Gabe, Adam, Heather, thank you for having me on. I'm glad this all worked out.
So let's start from the top. Happy spring training opening day, I guess, if you want to call it that. First game was today and went about as expected as a first spring training game of the season goes. Everyone thankfully left, no injuries, and some sloppy play, some ineffectiveness from the pitchers. Just once again, early spring action as it comes to be every year, and so it didn't seem like there was really any key takeaways from the game, at least that I really. What were your takeaways, Matt, if you had any?
Yeah, I thought the most impressive performance was actually from Riley O'Brien after he commits an error to allow one runner on and issues a walk, so 2 on, nobody out. He strikes out the next 3, so that was good to see. If he can show something like that in the regular season, Cardinals certainly could use that in the bullpen. They need more high leverage, especially after Andrew Kittredge left. Thought Fetty's sweeper looked pretty good. He threw just the 1 inning. Matthew Liberatore was fine. I mean, there's just, like you allude to, there's not a whole lot to take away from it. They're up 6-0 in the bottom of the 7th, and you don't like to see them blow a lead like that, but also the guys who were involved in it are guys who probably aren't going to have a huge impact on the Cardinals, at least at the start of the season. Maybe Matt Swanson is going to be somebody who plays a role at some point during the year, but nothing really good, nothing really bad. It's the first day of spring. We still have 5 more weeks of this.
And you did allude to Riley O'Brien's appearance, and when Gabe and I were there for winter warm-up, and we asked Ryan Helsley, a part of the media scrum, who's somebody that you could see filling that Andrew Kittredge role, and he mentioned Riley O'Brien by name and said that dude's nasty. So it seems like, at least internally, the guys in the clubhouse really view Riley O'Brien as someone who's kind of a hidden gem and somebody who's just kind of poised to break out.
Yeah, his stuff will play if he can put it all together. And he's had multiple opportunities, and it's not just the Cardinals who have given him an opportunity. He's never been able to fully put it together at the big league level. But in terms of his arm, it is electric. His stuff is really good. And if he finds a way to, for whatever reason, harness what he's not harnessing historically, once Major League Baseball regular season games get going, he could be a big-time weapon out of the bullpen.
I want to point out one person's performance who, Matthew Liberatore. It's a very, very, very small sample, but on Stuff Plus, his cutter, which I believe is a new thing he's trying, rated as a 129, which was matched by his curveball, which was a 130, and a slider, which was 123. Now, his fastball still seems to suck, but if his cutter can replace his fastball a little bit against right-handed batters, he could be a lot better of a reliever this year. So hopefully that's a sign of things to come, but it's like 3 pitches, so hard to read too much into it so far.
Yeah, it's he topped out on the cutter at, topped out that about 92 today. Got 97 on the 4-seamer. As far the whiff rate, he didn't get a lot of swings and misses. He got 2 swings and misses today on his slider, which he threw 5 times. He threw the 4-seamer 11 times and didn't get a swing and a miss on that one. Threw it for 73% strikes. But again, we're doing this thing on day number 1. It's really hard to evaluate much of anything at this point.
I didn't get a chance to see the game today, but it looks like what I'm reading is Jordan Walker was it a good catch, or is this something old I'm reading? I'm curious. How does he look in the outfield? Any better? Same?
I
What are your opinions?
Yeah, I thought he kind of looked the same. There was a challenging play early on. That's probably what you're alluding to. It wasn't the prettiest route to get there, but he got there and he made the catch, off the bat, and it's going out to right field. You're kind of thinking to yourself, okay, is Walker going to get there? And actually, I'm sitting there with Mike Claiborne. We're watching the game together in the booth, and my comment at that moment was, it's not his job to make it look pretty. It's his job to make catches. So he made the catch, and I think he has really improved himself as an outfielder. And if he can be an average defensive outfielder, where he's probably not going to catch some ones that are, barely a little bit more than routine. But I also think with his athleticism, he's able to go out there and make a spectacular play every once in a while. I'm not overly concerned about who he is from a defensive standpoint.
Now, it is a
'Cause
fair.
we're kind of the,
Sorry,
I was just
Heather.
gonna say we're kind of the Jordan Walker hype train, I think is what we were calling it last
woo.
episode. And so the reason I bring it up is just I want him to do well. And so I'm wondering like how crucial it is for that defense to improve for him to be, a valuable player on the team, or if the bat will play enough to where the defense is fine as is. That's something that I don't feel like I know enough about to make a decision.
Yeah, I don't think the defense plays into this. If we're starting to evaluate Jordan Walker on his defense, that means he's not hitting enough for it not to matter, and that's a problem. So I would say the same thing about Nolan Gorman. These are the guys that are key. When you look at what happened with the Cardinals last year, they simply did not score enough runs. So I'm not trying to be dismissive of who players are in the field, and I understand that defense is important, and there's a certain line that you cross where you become a liability out there. I don't think Walker's a liability. And as long as he can be at least in the neighborhood of being an average defensive outfielder, I want his bat to come around, and anything you get from him defensively is bonus.
I did want to make the quick point that, down there at Roger Dean Stadium, typically we do hear about, and your teammate Ricky Horton did make mention of it at the top of the broadcast too, that the wind was blowing in, and it's just a tricky outfield to play for even big league guys. And so not wanting to make too many excuses for him, but it does play a factor.
Yeah, that's not an easy ballpark to hit in and to play in the outfield. The fences are in a little bit this year. They moved the bullpens off of the foul lines and they put them out beyond the outfield. So when they put them in the outfield, they had to bring the fences in. I think that's good. The Cardinals, if I remember correctly, last year the Cardinals were the last team in all of spring training to even hit a home run. It's just not a home run hitting ballpark. And you play so many of your games there because you play all your home games there, and then all games against the Marlins are there as well. So I'm a believer that you want guys feeling good about themselves when spring comes to an end. And one way to do that is to make sure the guys can hit a home run here and there. So I'm glad the walls are in a little bit. We didn't see one today, but just that it's not an easy place to play for sure. Should also note that they put in a brand new surface this year. The field looked great. So I like the changes they made to the ballpark. Fences come in, brand new playing surface, all the way around. Good things.
No, I mean, I know like something that we talked about last episode, and we kind of already alluded to it a little bit just now with Jordan Walker out there on defense. And obviously in 2023, it was pretty difficult and rough to see him out there, obviously with very little experience because he was primarily moved away from third base out into the outfield because of Arenado blocking him. We did see a lot of improvement in 2024, albeit still a lot to work on. Very fringy range out there in the outfield. Not the best reactions, but the throwing arm speaks for itself. What do you think is his future outlook? I wanted to gather a lot of as many opinions as I could from a lot of the experts. What do you believe is his future out there in right field, if he has any? If it's not in right field, do you think you stick him at first base once Contreras starts to wind down, or what is your plan for him?
Yeah, I don't think third base is in the picture. People bring up third base all the time, and I mean, I just don't think that's something that's going to be something. I understand that he came up as that. I think it was a bad job by the Cardinals not to move him off of third base earlier than they did. He never projected to me as a third baseman. It is first base or the outfield, one or the other. He seems to be more comfortable in right field than left field, so that's why they have him out there. And you mentioned Wilson Contreras. If Contreras puts together the kind of offensive season that you think he can put together, then this is a guy who's going to be at first base for a while. But down the line, could Walker move in and play first base? Yeah, absolutely. That's what he could do. But he's got to get his offense taken care of first. Like, the last thing I want him worrying about is playing a new position and really working on the defensive stuff. He's around because he needs to be able to hit, and he needs to drive it, and he needs to drive in runs. So, yeah, is there an opportunity for him to move to first base at some point down the line? Sure. But again, I think it's so important that he can just be comfortable in one position. That's why even to this day, I can't tell you how often I hear from people saying, oh, why don't you just put Walker over at third? That's what he came up as. The last thing that you want for this guy is for him to be playing a new position again, because I think that would largely impact who he is in terms of his continued evolution as a hitter.
And
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I mean, as long as Nolan Arenado is still there, there's not many third basemen defensive that are better than him, despite the offensive struggles that he has in recent years. So I totally agree with you. I think the math doesn't make a whole lot of sense putting him back at third base, especially when he hasn't had much experience there and all over the past 18 months. Future Hall of Famer over there right now, especially the multiple Gold Gloves that he's had in his career. So yeah, I think there's needs to be another contingency plan there. Totally agree with you.
Yeah, and look, even if Nolan Arenado walks out the door at some point, you've got better options. Nolan Gorman also came up as a third baseman, and I think that's more of a natural position. I'd rather see Gorman at third than I want to see Walker. I'd rather see Donovan at third before I'd want to see Walker. Thomas Ajayce can play third if you need to. Like, there's so many options on the roster defensively at third that would make so much more sense than Walker.
Yeah, I agree.
So taking a reversing course just a little bit, we jumped right into spring training, but let's back up to the off season that we just came off of, a very quiet winter, Matt. From the outset, whenever John Mozeliak came out and did his end of season press conference, I think fans had, and us media types also, kind of had a connotation of what we thought the offseason would look like. And then, when you were there at the winter meetings and listening to Mo talk and just kind of like the general charting of how the offseason went, how did you assess, or not necessarily assess, but how did you perceive the offseason and certain pivot points where things changed? Just kind of how did you read the offseason and how it sort of kind of changed and evolved as it went along?
Yeah, it went forever. We were all being taken hostage by the Alex Bregman situation, and then really nothing ends up happening. Assessing, I mean, there's nothing to assess because nothing happened other than the fact that they walked away from Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson. They allowed Paul Goldschmidt to leave via free agency. I mean, those are the big moves. I do a couple things. So first off, I think the market forces changed the offseason a little bit, because when they made the announcement at the end of the season that they wanted to, reduce payroll, and Arenado was a part of that, at that point in time, they didn't know what their TV deal was going to look like. They did take a reduction in money from their regional sports network partner and what is now FanDuel Sports Network Midwest. 24% or so, I think, is the number they came down on. That's actually pretty good. When you look at what has happened industry-wide, I think the Cardinals made out pretty good in terms of the money they were going to get. So they probably didn't expect to get quite that much money from their TV partner. The legalized gambling became a thing in Missouri, even though it hasn't started yet, but that's going to be another revenue flow. So I think those market forces did change things a little bit in terms of the bottom line for the Cardinals, which is why when they didn't trade Arenado, the narrative changed to they're okay with it from a financial standpoint. Because I remember sitting in that room in Dallas at the winter meetings where Mo admitted that their intent was to trade Arenado. And his words, I mean, I'll paraphrase, but essentially this is exactly what he said. His words were, there's other ways to trim payroll, but this is the easiest way to do it. It's kind of saying if they don't trade Nolan Arenado, well, they're going to have to do something else. And then that changed during the offseason for whatever reason, where they no longer felt the need that they had to get Arenado's number, or at least that much, off the books. Katie Wu wrote the story in The Athletic that published here over the last day or two that really kind of chronicled from that moment at the baseball, even before that, because she mentioned the fact that Mo went to Colorado when the Cardinals were playing the Rockies late in the season and talked to Arenado, and that's when they first discussed the idea of him being traded. And Katie's really good story took the whole thing from that moment to where we're at now, that Arenado is a Cardinal. And there's a lot of people, and I think rightfully so. I think it's a fair criticism of John Mozeliak when he sat there and said at the baseball winter meetings that his intention was to trade Arenado, and then he doubled down on that at winter warmup when he said priority 1, 2, and 3 is to trade Arenado. The initial reaction to that when you don't trade Arenado is that it was a failed offseason because that was your stated goal. And I don't have a problem with people who say that, because at a very surface level, if you as an individual or as an organization saying this is your goal and then you don't reach your goal, there's a reason to say, well, it was a failed offseason. My reaction to that would be, look at what happened. They thought that they had a deal done with the Astros, and Arenado said no. Arenado has a list of teams that he was willing to go to. He had a no trade clause, and he had 5 teams on there. What's Mo supposed to do? Is he supposed to fly to Los Angeles and take Andrew Friedman hostage and say you have to come off of Max Muncy and you have to be interested in Arenado? Do you go to San Diego and say the same thing about Manny Machado? I don't love the fact that the Cardinals were so open about the priority 1, 2, and 3 thing. I get the optics are not great, but I also have a really hard time being critical of someone who is being really honest. Honesty is not something that we should be critical of. So I don't know who the bad guy in all of this is. It's totally fair for Arenado to say, yeah, I'd go to the Astros, and then the Astros aren't going to bring back Bregman, and he looks at the situation and says, maybe I'm not going to go to the Astros. That's his right. If the teams that are on the list aren't interested in Arenado, what is Mo supposed to do? So I don't know. I think there's more nuance to that whole situation than maybe a lot of people give credit for.
And then on the flip side of that, I think Mo, a criticism he gets from people is that he's not open enough, Mo speak and all that. So then when he is very open and it kind of backfires in this way by putting your cards on the table and then it doesn't happen, then there's criticism for not doing what you set out to do. So there's a lose-lose.
Yeah, no, look, I personally like Mo as a person, and he's really good and fair to me. So I have that. There are criticisms there. We look at where the organization is at. The organization has been passed by when it comes to the use of technology and data and analytics, and they've taken some bad, the spending big time air quotes, big time money on middle level free agents, positions on a roster that really need to be filled up by guys coming up through the minor league system, and you're not producing those kind of players. We all know that there are issues in the organization. We all know that the organization has not won as many games as fans would like, and that they've been lapped by other teams. And a lot of that falls on John Mozeliak. Those are very fair criticisms of him. But I was in Milwaukee for a while, and when I was in Milwaukee, David Stearns was their president of baseball operations, who's now with the Mets. And I like Stearns a lot. I think he is a fantastic baseball executive. But I'll tell you this, he doesn't say anything. I get home to St. Louis and I'm dealing with Mo, and I'm talking to a guy who is about as honest as you're going to get from a big time sports executive like that. And I understand why some people feel like he isn't as honest and why he holds things back. But I think if you take a step back and start to compare him to other baseball executives, you start to realize he actually says a lot more than most of the executives out there.
Yeah, and you kind of gotten into the Nolan Arenado stuff, which was a kind of a good segue for me to kind of ask you about. So today we saw that John Denton and Katie Wu were among their colleagues as well. Were kind of all over the story. I guess the flavor of the day that the Astros, after Bregman had signed, kind of circled back and reached out to the Cardinals, but it appears from reporting that there's really not much there going on, just that the Astros simply just kind of checked back in on where things were. Is there anything more to glean from that situation, or is it just kind of still is what it is?
I think it just is what it is. I've got so much Arenado fatigue at this point. I
think we all do.
I just want spring training to take place, and if the season gets started and the team is not good and he is good, or if the team's really good and he's not good, or if there's an injury or something, then we can start talking about this again. When I first read that report today, there was, you mentioned John Denton, but Mark Feinsand, who's really, really good, and I believe it's Brian McTaggart, who's a Houston reporter, like all three. So McTaggart, Feinsand, and Denton were all involved in that reporting, and it was good reporting by all of them. But when I read it, I kind of said, I don't know about this. Like, I don't know if I buy every part of this. And I think what we've learned now is that was true, but it was more of a just kind of a check-in. And at this point in time, there's still no indication from Arenado that he's going to waive the no trade clause. That was kind of the follow-up that we got from Katie Wu a little while later. So I want this thing to go away. I want there to be some resolution to it, whether he's going to be here, whether he's not going to be here. I don't want to be taken hostage for the next however many weeks by this Nolan Arenado thing. By the way, I joked around with reporters today. So I am in Florida until March 7th. Tom Ackerman from KMOX gets here on March 9th. We have one day where we're not going to have a KMOX staffer outside of the broadcast crew in Florida. So everybody out there, circle March 8th on your calendar. That's going to be the day that something crazy happens.
That's hilarious.
And Matt, I hate to kind of continue beating this Arenado horse. I know we all are exhausted of it. We're all jaded, but given the Cardinals spot where they're at right now, we've talked in previous podcasts on VEB about what the optics should be in terms of the plan going forward. Obviously we've heard Arenado's name a lot this offseason. Nothing's really materialized. We've heard Helsley last trade deadline and a little bit this offseason. Can you kind of allude to what you believe the depth of this, I don't want to say rebuild, but maybe this retooling of the roster? Like how many guys do you think we could be seeing as like maybe wearing different uniforms on contenders as we get closer to July 31st or July 30th?
Yeah, really interesting question. And if you didn't notice, by the way, they have changed their verbiage. It's no longer reset, rebuild. It's now transition. They are referring to it as a transition year, not a reset year. The reset really hasn't happened because of the older guys that are still around wanting to be here. Sonny Gray didn't want to get traded. Wilson Contreras didn't want to get traded. Nolan Arenado didn't get traded so far. So it's not really the reset like they thought it was going to be. They have an old starting rotation outside of Andre Palante, and we'll see what ends up happening with Michael McGreevy. But right now, McGreevy, if you go 5-man rotation, is probably on the outside looking in. So I think those players that could potentially get traded, it is going to be connected to how well the team plays this year. And I'm not trying to be a homer for the team, but I don't completely understand the people who think this is going to be a really, really bad baseball team. And let me be clear. This is not a World Series winning team. This is probably not a deep playoff run team. This is probably not even a division winning team, although I could see a scenario where they're in contention for that. But can they sneak into the playoffs? They absolutely can. They were a winning club last year from record standpoint. It was not a season that was good because they didn't get to the playoffs. But a lot of guys are back. Offensively, they almost just by luck, they almost have to be better. Last year, from an offensive standpoint and a run scoring standpoint, was so terrible. And it's going to be hard to repeat what they did last year. Now, at the same time, I also think the bullpen was just nails last year. Fantastic. And by luck, probably the bullpen will take a step back. It's going to be hard to replicate what they did last year from a bullpen perspective. But I do think there's a very good chance what they do taking a step forward in run scoring will mitigate out and more maybe any step back that they take in the bullpen. So I think this team could have an okay season. I think this team could be in playoff contention much of the year. And I am getting to your question. This is all connected. If that is the case, and if this team is in legitimate playoff contention, I would be pretty surprised if they traded a Ryan Helsley. Um, the Arenado thing is different. I don't think that so much is connected to how good they are, but the Helsley thing I think will be connected to how good they are. If they are not having a very good season, if they are out of playoff contention, if they get off to a really bad start again, and they've gone off to bad starts each of the last 2 seasons, if all that happens, then yeah, I think Helsley goes, and I think you get a pretty good return for him. I would be curious to see, when Devin Williams was traded, I thought it was a good move for the Brewers just because they got some help at the major league level. But I looked at the value they got back for him, and I was actually a little surprised. I thought they would have gotten a little bit more for him. So if you try to take that value and even apply it to prospects and not major league ready guys, if that's what you're getting for Helsley, I think some fans might be a little bit disappointed. But if you get some desperate teams coming up on the deadline who don't have a closer, or just their bullpen hasn't been very good, Helsley to me is the number one guy that you potentially move. Now, would Sonny Gray waive his no trade clause, and would you feel comfortable with that? Eric Fetty's another guy. I think Fetty clearly is somebody that you could probably spin him off. So if you're not winning, Helsley and Fetty would probably be the top 2 guys that I would look at the Cardinals at moving.
So to pivot to spring training, which I think you want to talk about more, I guess this is a philosophy question or a philosophical question. How much do you pay attention to the results in spring training, and do you pay attention for certain players and ignore for others, or like what's your philosophy for how they actually perform and how much you like pay attention to that?
Yeah, definitely some guys spring matters and some guys spring does not matter. If you are competing for a job, then spring training results matter. I would remind folks that it's also spring training results are not just the results of Grapefruit League games. It's what's going on in the backfields, and everything back there is charted. They've got the technology on all the backfields to be able to look at things. Spring training stats have to matter. Like my inclination on all of this is to kind of throw away what you see in spring training games because there's almost so much randomness to it. But if you're going to tell a guy that you've got a chance to go win a job and then he outperforms somebody else who's competing for that same job, then those results absolutely do have to matter. There's a lot of talk about this because to make these results matter that much more, do you try to play some guys deeper into games? One of the questions I have is going back to the last 2 seasons where they've gone off to a slow start each of the last 2 years. What do you do in spring to try to prevent that? And is it allowing guys to play deeper into games as we go along? I don't know if I'm completely answering your question because I feel like I'm kind of waffling back and forth, but the truth to it, the answer to it is somewhere in between. It's not the end all be all because these are Grapefruit League games, and a lot of these at bats are against pitchers that are not going to be in the big leagues and vice versa. But there still has to be value. There still has to be something that you take away from these games.
You had mentioned that you spent some time in Milwaukee before coming over to St. Louis, and I think we would be remiss if we didn't ask you about Bob Uecker and his impact and his passing away this offseason, and if there were any stories you wouldn't mind sharing with us. Just everyone who interacted with Ueck always has a story about their interaction with him, so I didn't know if there was something that you would mind sharing with us about Ueck and your experience with him.
Yeah, and I always, whenever I talk about Ueck, I've talked about him a lot here over the past few weeks since his passing. I always like to say, it would be disingenuous if I sat here and said I was his best friend or I spent tons of time with him. We were certainly colleagues. We certainly had conversations. We worked together. We saw each other on an everyday basis. But especially post-COVID, he was hard to kind of get into his circle and be around him as much. They're very protective of him. But a couple things. First off, the year that the Brewers got to Game 7 of the NLCS and lost to the Dodgers, the Yelich MVP season, I think that's 2018, if I remember correctly. The players voted him a playoff share, which broadcasters never get playoff shares. That's ridiculous that a broadcaster would be voted a playoff share. So really, really cool that happened. And he took that money and gave 100% of it away to charity. He was incredibly charitable, always did that. And then I also think the story of his final day at the ballpark in Milwaukee is kind of poignant now that he has passed away, because the Brewers were playing that 3-game series in Milwaukee against the Mets, and he had not been doing many games. His health was really, really faltering, and he showed up. He didn't. I don't think he showed up at all for Game 1, if I remember correctly, or he was there and he had to leave early. And then Game 2, he came in and he was really going to try to do the broadcast. I think he did the pregame interview that day with Pat Murphy, and then after that, he just realized from a health standpoint, he did not have it in him. He sat in the booth, I think, until about the 6th or 7th inning that night, and then ended up leaving. And then they won that game, so that extended their season. And he shows up the next day, and he ends up doing the 9th inning, which in hindsight, that was when Pete Alonso hit that home run. They were up, and Alonso hits the home run, and it ends the Brewers season. And that was one of Uke's final calls. That was the Uke's final call, basically, in that spot. And after that game, he went down to the clubhouse and he lingered for like an odd amount of time. People took note because he would always go into the clubhouse. He actually had a locker in the clubhouse. He was very welcome in there. That's where he felt most comfortable. So it was very normal for Uke to be in the clubhouse. But that night, he was there forever. And then he spent a lot of time with Christian Yelich. Yelich was asked about it in post game, and he started crying. Jeff Levering, who's one of the other broadcasters for the Brewers, who was spectacular, he lost it during the post game show, and he had teared up and everything. And I think now we can look back and know, because he was fighting cancer, only a handful of people knew. But his broadcast partners knew. Yelich was one of the people who did know that they were pretty close. I think we know now that he knew that was his last ever day inside of a Major League Baseball clubhouse and inside the Brewers clubhouse. And he was going to have as many conversations as he could. He was going to say his goodbyes, and that was it. And now, after he passed away just a little while later, I think we can go back and look at what happened that night and know, man, he knew it. He knew that was going to be his final moment at the ballpark.
And, along with Uke and Mike Shannon and Vince Scully recently, it's been a big, baseball broadcasting as a whole. And there's a couple others. I believe there was one in San Diego as well, who recently had passed away as well, that, broadcasting of baseball has taken a big hit over the last few years, certainly. And so, it's great to still see, voices and names. And I think we're very lucky in St. Louis having John Rooney and Ricky Horton on the call. And, it's unfortunate, but it also is just, a fact of life that people get old, people pass away. It is what it is. But, it's still something where we have to look back and be fortunate that we got that amount of time with Uke and all of these great broadcasters too. So,
and he was 96, 97 somewhere, and he was well into his 90s. This man was still the funniest man in the room. He was still the sharpest guy around. I mean, he was one of those guys he was just so naturally funny, and he never broke. So you would never totally know if he was making a joke or not. He always was, but he never, ever, ever broke. And he was always the funniest person in any room that he was in.
That kind of reminds me, you have it reminds me of just a bit outside, but do you have a favorite euchre? Euchre. Yeah, call.
Ukeism, I guess.
Yeah, Ukeism. I was thinking of Shannonisms or.
Yeah, his home run call was it was the get up, get out of here, gone call. And he had started, I forget, wow, man, it was actually fairly recent that he started using that as his call. And it's perfect. And the fact that it wasn't really something that was being used a lot. I'm not a big fan of home run calls. Like, as somebody who's done a little bit of baseball play-by-play in my life, that's I wouldn't really go to that, but his home run call, and I don't think you can't have a new like really good home run call at this point. His was pretty fantastic. So yeah, the other thing about Uke is, and this kind of goes back to that, Brewers fans would, not that they wanted to see their team get blown out, but one of the benefits of a blowout loss is all of a sudden it would become story time with Uke. And these broadcasts would all of a sudden just be so focused on him telling stories. And yeah, I left there and it was the Pujols back year. So we're 20, what was that, 22? I left there middle of the season 22. So at that point, he hadn't been doing road games in years and years and years. He had totally rolled back where he was only doing home games. And as someone who was in the studio when the Brewers would be on the road, the broadcast would open up. Uke wouldn't be on it because he doesn't do road games. He never does road games. And the phone would start ringing with people asking, "Where's Uke?" And again, like, he's never on road games, but that was his like impact, that even after years of not doing a road game, the radio station would still get phone calls if it was a road game that he wasn't on.
How do you make the catching situation going forward, I should suppose, because they've got Jimmy Crooks and then Bernal, and even further back, Hernandez, and maybe Rodriguez will be something.
Mm-hmm.
And like, who do you think is getting traded out of these guys? Because people are getting traded at some point, and I realize not all these prospects are going to pan out, but like some of them, I mean, one or two of them probably will become something.
Yeah, let's just look at the top four: Pedro Paz, Von Herrera, Jimmy Crooks, Leonardo Bernal. Crooks is probably, when a catcher goes down to injury this year, Crooks is likely the guy. So he's your third catcher on the major league depth chart at this point, and Bernal could be here maybe at some point in 2026 is probably that. So to your point, all four of those guys are not going to be on the roster. Now, is there a possibility that they can look at Ivan Herrera, because that's an impact bat. That's an 800 OPS guy that you want in your lineup. Give him as much credit as you can possibly give for the work that he put in this offseason. The fact that he started the first game of spring, I think they really want to find a way to get him into the lineup as much as possible because of that bat. And they were really happy with the work that he put in. He went to Driveline. We talk about Driveline a lot when it comes to hitters. He went to Driveline to work on his ability of throwing runners out. So if through spring he looks really good defensively, I think that adds almost another wrinkle to your question, because one answer to your question is, you move Herrera to more of a DH type spot. You move him off of catching, and then whether it's Paez and Crooks, or once Bernal gets there, there's one less guy in that equation. If Herrera's really good from a defensive standpoint, you're probably less likely to move him off of that, and it does increase his value because there's going to be a lot of teams out there that would love to have him. I'm not trying to not answer your question. I don't know who they move. I don't like the idea of moving off of, again, an 800 OPS guy who can catch. That's not something that generally happens very often. But at the same time, I think Jimmy Crooks is probably likely the frontline starter at some point in the next year and a half. So if you're going to do that, then probably the value that you get back for an Ivan Herrera is going to be greater than the value you get back for a Pedro Paez. So if that's what you're going to judge it off of, if you're really comfortable with what Crooks gives you from an offensive standpoint, in addition to what he does defensively, probably Herrera is the guy that you move, because he's the guy who's likely to give you more of a return as compared to Paez.
Oh, yeah, that makes total sense.
So Jimmy Crooks just reminded me of a question that I just thought of it. So this might be a bad question, I don't know. But the Cardinals have the 5th overall pick, I think, this year.
Mm-hmm.
What would you, what personally, I don't know how much you follow, prospects and all that, but what would you personally like to see them do with that pick, or do you have a preference?
I don't have a preference. I want them to pick the best available player. I think you really get into, you lose value on a pick like that when you go into it saying that you want somebody from a certain position group, or you want somebody who is a college guy because they're going to be quicker to the big leagues than a high school guy. I want them to select the player who is the best player with the highest ceiling available. This doesn't happen very often where you have a top 5 pick, and it certainly doesn't happen that you have back-to-back seasons with top 10 picks. And JJ Wetherholt, who they picked 7th last year, he has star written all over him. He could have been the overall number 1 pick. He dealt with a little bit of an injury, and that dropped his stock. There's no reason to not believe he's going to be a really, really good player, like an all-star caliber kind of player. And he could arrive to the big leagues at some point, maybe as early as the end of this season. It could kind of be like the Mason Wynn treatment that he got a couple seasons ago for the final month or so, just to get the feet there a little bit wet in the into the big leagues. So I have zero preference on position, zero preference on high school versus college. I want them to just make sure that whatever player they have as the most talented player on the board, barring any sort of like red flags or anything like that, but just generally speaking, that they select the best player available. And it takes the kid 4 years to get to the big leagues. It takes the kid 4 years to get to the big leagues.
And
Is there any specific name like that you've been hearing in rumblings, or is that too far off?
I think it's still far off. There's names you hear, but even that, you hear about the guys who are probably going to get selected, number 1, number 2. So, no, I'm not. And I had Randy Flores on the Countdown to Opening Day show maybe a month ago, 5-6 weeks ago, somewhere in there. And I basically asked him that exact question. I said, are you guys already zeroing in on a short list of players that you would want to select there? And there is a short list, just in the sense that when you have the number 5 overall pick, as of now which players are considered elite level players. But Randy also said that it's very common for guys to have breakout seasons. And JJ Wetherholt's a great example of that. So coming out of high school, he did not get drafted, and he really didn't have very many collegiate offers. And West Virginia gave him a scholarship, and they were either his only Division I scholarship offer or his only Power 5 scholarship offer. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he went to West Virginia, and he told me that he didn't really feel like West Virginia loved him. They just kind of gave him the scholarship because they had it. So then he had a nice first year, and then all of a sudden his sophomore year, he hit something like 447, and he explodes as a prospect. So in 2 years, which is not a very long amount of time, in 2 years, he goes from a guy who does not get drafted at all to a guy who was in the conversation to be the overall number 1 draft pick. So I think the point that Randy was making to me when he said you got to keep your all options open, there could be some things that happen this year, especially in collegiate baseball, that somebody might really emerge that's not really on that short list right now.
You had referenced JJ Wetherholt, and he is down there in big league camp. What have you seen from him so far? And is he kind of how would I put this? Is he like stacking up to the stature that everyone, or the hype that everyone is putting on him?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I had heard some Bryce Harper comps to him on his personality.
Interesting.
So I interviewed him the other day. It was on the Countdown show 2 weeks ago, and when I asked him to talk, because I had never chatted with him before, I had heard the Bryce Harper comp. So I was kind of expecting one personality, and then that wasn't him at all. Like, no bravado, no, he just seemed like a really nice young man who was very happy to be in the spot that he is in. I've seen him hit during live BP. I don't think you take a whole lot away from live BP because it's live BP. It's not even games yet. I don't think he got in the game. I always leave the games a little earlier because you got to go to like the media patio. So I'm looking at the box score now. He did not get into today's game. Chase Davis got into today's game, another first rounder, but Wetherholt did not. So I'd be lying to you if I could sit here and tell you a lot of things that I've seen from him here so far in spring. But I really enjoyed my conversation with him, and he looks like he fits inside the clubhouse. I think he's comfortable in there. And this is just anytime you're somebody like Wetherholt, like Davis, when you get that first invite to big league spring training, that's a big thing to kind of check off, and it gives the major league staff an opportunity to see them up close. It gets them the opportunity to be around guys that they're going to be teammates with. It gives them the feeling of what it's like to be a big leaguer. At some point, each of these guys will be reassigned to minor league camp, but this is a good chance for them early on here in spring training.
I didn't know.
Do you think they're going to send him to, sorry, do you think they're going to send him to high or double A?
I think it depends a little bit on his on what he does here. I want to say double A, but yeah, I was having conversations with people at the winter meetings about whether or not he would even be invited to big league camp. A bunch of media, we were sitting around at the winter meetings, and somebody brought up the question, do you think that JJ Wetherholt will get an invite to big league camp? And my initial reaction was, of course he's going to be invited to big league camp. Absolutely he is. And a lot of people pushed back on that. And I didn't totally understand why. So when you ask that question, I'm like having flashbacks to that, because I want to say that you just get him at double A, and he's a little bit of an older guy anyways, and give him the opportunity to fail at that level if he wants to. But then I think about what other people have said just about where he's at in his maturation. Maybe it is something where you get him to high A, and if he dominates that level early on, you get him to double A really, really quickly. So I think some of it is connected to what we see in spring. He's going to get some chance in some games. I think it's either going to be the double A placement, or I think it's going to be the high A placement, with the idea that he's going to get to double A incredibly quickly. We've seen, Quinn Matthews covered all four minor league levels last year. So when this organization sees players who have a immediate big league future, they are aggressive in that. So by Matthews getting through 4 levels last year, that set him up for him to eventually get to the big leagues this year. If your idea is to get JJ Wetherholt either to the big leagues at the end of 2025 or competing for a spot at 2026, you have to start him somewhere where there is that opportunity to move up quickly. So double A, obviously he's right where you need to be. If it is high A, I think there's going to be pressure on him to move up as quickly as possible, so you can get him a little bit of double A and triple A time before that eventual promotion.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time. We don't want to keep you any longer. I know you've basically been...
You did not ask me the walk-up music song that you said that I spent so much time, and I found the song.
I was going to ask you off air, but okay. What you got for me?
All right, so I was pulling back the curtain. You told me you were going to ask me this question, and I tried to find the song that I was looking for because I couldn't think of the artist, and I thought of it as we were talking. I thought the song was built for this. It's actually made for this. It's a contemporary Christian song, which I'm a fan of that kind of music, and the artist is Carrollton, and it's made for this. That would be my walk-up song.
Awesome.
I found it. I had to share that because I would have been disappointed if I found it and then didn't get asked that.
Well, shout out to Carrollton for Made for This then for the
there you go.
podcast. But thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule, Matt. We look forward to hearing you pre and post all season long, and we hope to have you back on again sometime during the season to kind of check in with you how things are going.
Yeah, absolutely. This was fun. Thanks for having me on here.
Absolutely. And thank you, Gabe, Heather, and Adam, all for checking in and once again doing the thing. So thank you guys, everybody, for listening. For Matt Pauley, for Gabe Simons, Heather Simon, and for Adam Akbani, my name is Jake Wood. Have a great night, and thanks for listening. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Viva Albertos podcast. Please leave a rate and review on your favorite platform and turn on those bell notifications so you can be notified the moment our newest episode is released. As always, make sure to give us a follow on X, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Facebook. Just type in Viva Albertos on any platform to find us. Have a great day, and thanks for listening.